Jacksonville. Known for its perennial failing, the inability to build a truly cohesive system that can achieve success and accolades, and one that is distracted by flashy choices that seem good in the moment but ultimately hurt it more in the long run. Oh, you thought I was talking about the Jaguars. Well, I'm actually talking about Jacksonville's transit agency. Jacksonville has some of the worst public transit for a city of its size in the US. With poor route coverage and frequency offered by the Jacksonville Transit Authority, it's no wonder that no one is taking transit there. But JTA has a vision for transportation in the city, one that is so innovative, it will be a leader in the future of transportation. Yeah, maybe not. But how did JTA end up going down this path of financing one of the most laughably bad transit projects ever? And what can they even do going forward? Jacksonville, Florida as a city went down pretty much the same path that a lot of other American cities did in the 20th century. It was a city that built itself as a port town, and soon became a railroad hub that fostered a good streetcar system around many walkable neighborhoods. That quickly disappeared in the post-war suburban boom. During this time of suburban post-war sprawl, the city founded an agency to build roadways in the city called the Jacksonville Expressway Authority. The Jacksonville Expressway Authority would exist for around 15 years before eventually being merged with a few private bus companies in the 70s. That would eventually form the Jacksonville Transportation Authority that we know today. This actually makes JTA different than most transit agencies that exist, as it has a duty to engage in road projects as well. But soon after the creation of JTA, it did start to begin looking at building a transit project, but it wasn't looking at some major metro system or anything like that. The region of Northeast Florida at the time wasn't very densely populated, but traffic congestion downtown was getting pretty bad, and JTA wanted to do something about it. They had seen some very new concepts for transit around the country and wanted in on it, so they settled for a cheaper option of transit that was just emerging: automated people movers. Alongside suburban-based heavy rail metros and monorails, automated people movers were seen as one of the biggest pieces of the future of public transportation, and they seemed like a really good option to reduce traffic in downtown Jacksonville. But this people mover project that JTA was doing was almost doomed from the start. While it first started researching construction for the people mover all the way back in 1976, it didn't secure funding until 1985, nearly a decade later. The full scope of the Skyway people mover was also significantly reduced over this time as well, with initial concepts wanting it to be a 4-mile long network to one that was less than 2.5 miles long that would be built out over a few years. The first segment of the people mover, now known as the JTA Skyway, opened to the public in 1989 after 2 years of construction, and it was a 3/4 of a mile, 3-station segment. While expansion was supposed to continue immediately after, JTA had issues negotiating a contract with Matra, which was the company that was supposed to build out the Skyway. So they acquired a new contract with Bombardier, but this was also a problem, as Bombardier hadn't worked with this type of people mover system. So in 1996, the JTA Skyway was shut down for a complete overhaul of the system, which would switch out the people mover for essentially a tiny monorail. Following this conversion, over the next 5 years, JTA would finish the first phase of the Skyway, expanding to that 2.5-mile long network. While the process to get the JTA Skyway built was long and tedious, I'm sure it gets great ridership to make up for it, right? Well, you don't exactly get called a Jacksonville joke for a generation by the local paper for nothing. The Skyway was built to cater to office workers into downtown, with the thought that they would drive 90% of the way to a parking garage, then take the Skyway over to their office. This is just massively flawed logic from the start, and with service only running on weekdays between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. and only for special events on the weekend, the ridership was abysmal from the start. While there was a small boost in ridership after JTA made it free to ride, it still hasn't ever been close to expectations. And on top of all of this failed planning, the Skyway is now facing major mechanical issues. The system is nearly 30 years old, and almost all of the trains have been taken completely out of service. This is because the new monorail system that they had chosen back in the 90s never really took off anywhere else. It is no longer being supported by the company that made it. Essentially, the current Skyway is on its last breath right now, but JTA for the past decade has been looking into a plan to replace the current Skyway with something different, something not yet seen in other cities, something more popular. Back in 2012, JTA brought in a man by the name of Nathaniel P. Ford, and Nat had a little bit of an idea. You see, Nat had spent the last few years working in the Bay Area with agencies like BART and Muni, and rather than listening to anything from what these agencies are doing, he saw some of the fun new technology emerging out of Silicon Valley, and he wanted a little slice of autonomous cars. Now, back in 2012, these things were at best a pipe dream, and still many years out from even seeing road testing. But back when Nat got the chance in Jacksonville to implement his vision for autonomous automated transit, he did so immediately, introducing the ultimate urban circulator, the U2C as it's also called. This was proposed back in 2015 as the replacement for the JTA Skyway, with a vision of fully automated pods moving people all around Jacksonville and its surrounding neighborhoods. The future was looking quite podular, except right from the very start, there were already some major problems with this plan. When U2C was first proposed for Jacksonville's downtown, the initial technology that the system would use was in its earliest of early stages. At best, you could test these things out on a closed course, and the companies that were making these systems were all tech startups founded by venture capital, meaning that at any moment these companies could fold mid-proposal, and a few of them did. This has continued to further delay the project from opening. On top of this, many of these autonomous vehicles just kind of suck for transit operations. The best vehicle that they have to offer is just a van with some cameras and sensors on it. It can only carry 16 people at a time, and its max speed is just 35 miles an hour. And on top of all of this, none of these vehicles can operate in the rain. In Florida, where it rains daily in the summertime. But what might be even worse than the system itself is its rollout. The year when we finally get the first results of the U2C project, we will be getting part 1 of phase 1, also known as the Bay Street Innovation Corridor. This 3-mile long marketing gimmick of a name will have the first autonomous vehicles running between the center of downtown Jacksonville and the Stadium District along Bay Street in mixed traffic. However, this wasn't always the plan. Just like with the Skyway project, JTA watered this segment down too, which originally had Bay Street getting bus lanes and bike lanes on Bay Street. JTA has continued to water down the U2C project, even suggesting that the Skyway conversion will not happen. So congratulations, Jacksonvillians, you got a slow, practically inaccessible vehicle that only carries about a dozen people, still requires an attendant by law despite the fact that it's mostly autonomous, will likely not be getting its own dedicated right-of-way, and can not run in the rain. You've just got a significantly worse version of a downtown circulator bus for a quarter of the cost and a quarter of the time. You could have just gotten yourself something like Orbit in Tempe, Arizona. The U2C project at the end of the day is a transit gimmick, one that's not fast or reliable, but looks flashy, innovative, and designed to trick people into thinking you're doing the future because you're using emerging tech. But what's the alternative to this? JTA needs to give up on its autonomous pod fantasy, but what could it do to actually further transit growth within Northeast Florida? One problem that JTA has had since its inception has been a total focus on transit within downtown Jacksonville alone. While Northeast Florida is probably the most car-dependent region in North America, public transit and micromobility has the option to change this. One of the few good projects that Jacksonville has done has been the creation of the First Coast Flyer, its branded frequent bus line service. Its 4 lines connect many different important parts of the region with downtown. However, the First Coast Flyer has a lot of room for improvement. Things like more added bus lanes and signal priority could really improve the speed of the service and increase ridership on the First Coast Flyer, as well as expansions on the First Coast Flyer network could also massively increase service, such as extending the Green Line to the airport or possibly introducing a busway or highway-like service that we see on Los Angeles's J Line, which could move people quickly along some of Jacksonville's busiest corridors such as I-10 or I-295. Jacksonville has also invested in micromobility near the core of the city with the creation of the Emerald Trail. While still under construction, this network of cycling infrastructure has the ability to change modal share within the most dense neighborhoods of the city away from cars. There has also been talk about taking the funds dedicated to U2C and building light rail with it instead, converting a portion of one of the existing First Coast Coast flyer routes, such as the Green Line with an extension to the airport, or the Red Line out to Jack's Beach. This would be able to drive more ridership, offering a more comfortable and faster method of transit than buses. However, it would be expensive, but would be well worth it for the region to finally get some rail transit. But there's an even more likely option for a transit project in the region that would revolutionize how Northeast Floridians get around. Jacksonville at one point was one of the biggest rail hubs in the South, and you can still see some of the remnants of that today, as the convention center used to be the city's main train station, but Jacksonville could very well get some of its rail back. The First Coast Commuter Rail has been a decades-old proposal for Jacksonville and Northeast Florida in general, but the idea is still sound: the creation of a regional rail network for Jacksonville. This system would start with its first branch, a line on the Florida East Coast right-of-way between downtown Jacksonville and downtown St. Augustine, Florida, with the potential for 2 additional lines being created, with one running north to Yulee and the other line running south to Green Cove Springs. This regional rail network would connect many of the major regional hubs in Northeast Florida with a fast rail system capable of getting people to take another mode of travel other than driving. Now, there is no one-size-fits-all transit solution. It's likely that multiple types of transit will have to be utilized in Northeast Florida in order to solve its major transit problems, as cars, and especially not pods, are not a one-size-fits-all solution to transportation. The ultimate urban circulator is not much more than a project envisioned by rich tech investors who don't even use transit in the first place. It's what happens when you stray too far from hearing what transit riders want. While it's going to be a long fight in Jacksonville to get transit that they deserve, it seems like there might be some weight towards it, as many have turned against U2C in favor of giving prove-it transit systems a future in Jacksonville. At the end of the day, we all want transit to be fast, frequent, and reliable. And if we're building a system that doesn't do any of that, then how is our city going to get better? It's time for those at the top of JTA to realize that the proven systems that other cities utilize is the way forward for how Jacksonville can become less car dependent and a better place to live. But have you ever taken the Skyway? How do you feel about autonomous vehicles? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks to everybody who helped me make this video, and a special thanks to all of my patrons. Without them, videos like this wouldn't be possible. And if you want to support the channel and get early access to videos, your name in the credits, and more, feel free to click the link. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see y'all on the next one.